you're audible, we are good to go.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. So far as yesterday we were discussing about the concept of US tariff policy and how the tariff policy of US has been evolving. And in the last we were going to the Power BI data analysis of the tariff structure and how it is being affecting various worlds and various nations and various countries so far as emerged or developed countries are concerned. So today I'll be continuing from that, and I hope we will complete that by today. And then tomorrow we'll take the next topic. If we could able to complete it by today, we can take today also the new topic. But first of all, we need to complete this. Then we'll move ahead because it is quite essential to understand what the US tariff policy is playing a big role all over the world, how it's affecting the other economies, and specifically India, and how India will be able to retaliate, or not just retaliate, how India will resist that shock that has caused. So what particular sectors will be most affected, and all these things we're gonna discuss today, and we'll try to analyze through the data. Now, I just share my screen. I hope now my screen will be visible to all of you. And meanwhile, if anyone faces any issues they couldn't follow, just put a message in the chat box so that I can try to correct it if it is possible for me. So, and in meanwhile, if you can't able to follow what I speak up or what I show on the screen, just let me know also about that. So I hope my screen, my Power BI screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, sir.
Uh, Yes. So as far as yesterday, we discussed about the uh, tariff by different administration and how it has affected the revenue, how it has affected the trade, how it has been different from Trump to Biden, then to from Obama to Trump, then again to Biden to again to Trump. So how it has been changing, this we have discussed yesterday. Today, what we are discussing all about is the current tariff rate as if we compared, because this 2025 compared with the previous year has shown a dramatic shift in the tariff imposition by United States of America. So what all have been the cause, what all have been the differences, and how each and every nation is affected, we need to see that. So let's hope we try to get a better picture. So these are the nations which are affected primarily by the US tariff, as you can see on the screen. One is Canada, another one is Mexico, next is UK, then it's Germany, then it's India, then China, then we can see Vietnam, Philippines, and Japan. So these are one, two, and lastly the Brazil. So these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 countries we are having from Mexico, Canada, Germany, China, Japan, Vietnam, India, UK, Brazil, and Philippines. And the size of the circle shows the amount of total exports to US made by these countries. So as you can see, the highest amount of exports to US is made by Canada and Mexico. Canada exports about $429 billion, and US Mexico exports for about $455 billion. So these are the highest exporters to USA. Next, the second number goes to Germany. Third is China. Then the next one is Japan. Then Vietnam. Thereafter, we are having India. After India, we are having UK. And after UK, we have Brazil. And at last, we have the Philippines. So this is the number. And I have shown this number here also in the Excel sheet also. So if we see by the volume, the highest volume of trade is done by the Canada and Mexico, so far as Canada and Mexico are concerned. Now, as we move ahead, as we move ahead, we see that Canada and Mexico are having the highest volume of trade. But are they most affected by the tariff rate? No. As we have seen yesterday, it is not affected by the trade as compared to what has been the other country situations. And the highest tariff rate is on India and Brazil, and they have been highly affected. How they have been affected, we'll discuss it later. How much exports are at risk, we have discussed yesterday also. Uh, I just represent my screen. There is some issue on my screen. I think it just getting some issues. I just reshare my screen because there is some issue on my laptop. I just be back in a minute. In a minute, I'll just reshare. Puneet sir, I just reshare in a minute. Huh? There is some issue.
Sure, sure.
Sorry for the interruption. I just reshare my screen. So as far as the exports are concerned, and we can see the highest tariff is on India and Brazil. Now we go by again to the Power BI analysis. So here it is the full long picture with us. Now we are trying to understand how much the tariff has been raised. So as we compare for each and every nation from Brazil to India, then to China, Philippines, Vietnam, Canada. So we can see the highest rises for Brazil and India, less for China. These are the comparativeness for the current tariff rate and the previous year tariff rate. That is the tariff rate for 24 and the tariff rate for 25. So for 2025, it is highest for India and Brazil, and you can see the difference. It was 4%, now it is 50%, and for India it was 3.5%, and now it is for about 50%. So for India and Brazil, you can see the highest rise, or you can see the highest difference from the previous years. Though if we compare it for Canada and Mexico, they also face a huge difference, though they were having a less tariff, but they have also seen a high rise, if you can see by percentage. So it was 1.8, it reached to 15. and for Mexico it was 2.1. It reached to again to 15. Though they were having less tariff, but not less what Germany, UK, and Japan are having. So this is a interesting fact. Though USMCA part, Mexico, Canada have been the part of the trade association with US, but though they have been the part, but they are having a higher tariff as compared to Germany, UK, and Japan. So we can just estimate, if we go by all this data, the lowest tariff is on Japan. Though Japan is having not so high trade, but at least Japan is having the lowest tariff rate, and that is the 10%. It is the minimum tariff which US have imposed in this particular year, that is 2025. Next part comes to the exports and the risk of exports. That is the exports which are at risk due to this tariff imposition. So on the light blue side, we can see the exports to the USA made by each country. You can see the numbers. And the dark blue shows the exports which are at risks. So if you can see, the $95.30 billion exports were at risk for Mexico, and these are the number of total exports. So out of this total exports of 455, the exports which got affected due to this tariff imposition of 15% on Mexico right now is about 95. Though they trade more, absolutely they will have a more risk of exports on them. Rest, if we take the case of India. In case of India, the total exports were $87 billion, and out of this $87 billion, about $48 of exports are vulnerable. That means 50%, almost 50%. So we can take the 50% tariff, 50% trade to US will be affected, or the 50% exports made to the US will be affected due to this tariff imposition right now. Rest all, they are having more or less same situation. But if we compare with Germany, Germany is least affected by this tariff imposition. We can see Germany, Canada, and Mexico, absolutely, and even the Japan also. Now we come to the next part. We will try to analyze how much for each country a particular sector will be affected. So this we have done today, the dimension for each country. Now we go the sector wise. That is the sector wise effect on each and every country. So first of all, we try to understand through the Excel, then we will try to analyze it through the Power BI. So this is a simple scenario. If in case we talk about specifically the case of India, first of all, we talk the case of India because that is most important thing we need to understand. Now, in case of India, highest tariff is imposed on textiles, then gems and jewelry, and leather goods. So these are the three sectors which are most affected by this tariff imposition, and they will be seeking the highest impact because the highest tariff is on textiles, gems and jewelries, and leather goods. Rest, if we talk about electronics, automotive, steel, aluminum, pharmaceutical face no tariff imposition, but chemicals, machineries, electronics, automotive, and less steel also faces the 50% tariff. So these four sectors will be having the highest hit: textiles, steel and aluminum, gems and jewelry, and leather goods. So you can see these four sectors will see a big impact on a macro level or on the stocks of these companies which are working under these sectors. You can see the fluctuations probably there, and they will start coming. So you can see these, except these four sectors, all other sectors will also be affected, but these are the prime sectors which will be affected by this. Now, how much the trade volume is there? So if we can see amongst these, the highest trade value, although pharmaceuticals having the highest exports among all these sectors, but the highest trade value comes through among these is the gems and jewelry. So gems and jewelry sectors will be the highest affected sector. Because the highest export value is in the gems and jewelry sector. And this is the expected impact percentage, that is minus 75%. So the highest effect or the major effect will be on the gems and jewelry sector. It is the sector which will be primarily get affected by this tariff imposition because we export a huge amount of gems and jewelry product towards the US from India. So Indian gems and jewelry sector will be facing a huge impact these days, and it is expected that it would lead to job loss also. And you can see we have taken the data for job risk also. So it's about 380,000. It's in thousand, like 380,000 jobs will be affected because of this imposition and because of this effect on the exports value. So you can estimate how the gems and jewelry sectors will be affected. Now the second sector where the effect will be more is the case of the textiles. In the textile industry, we can see the impact will be about 70%, though less than the gems and jewelry, but the expected impact will be 70%. So there will be a 70% fall in the exports, or that is the expected impact percentage because the trade volume is high. So the second sector which will be affected most will be textiles and apparels because we are exporting about $8.9 billion of exports in the form of textiles and apparels. And yes, there will be a huge job loss, that is about 450,000. Now, amongst these, the highest job loss will be in the case of textile sector. The textile sector will face a highest job loss for about 450,000, and it's a risk. It is not the job loss; it's a job loss risk. So this textile sector need to be taken care of with this imposition of tariff, and the supply chain diversification is must. Otherwise, you will be facing a huge issue of less transforming supply chain, and there will be a huge risk for our commodities to be competitive in the US markets. So these are the things. So whatever we have discussed till now, because I want to go very slow and very in a very subtle form, step by step. So if you have any questions, just let me know in between. Then I will continue. Anyone wants to know anything in this? Whatever we have discussed till now, from this table, someone wants to ask something, please let me know. Specifically, we are taking the case of India right now. That which Indian sector will be affected by how much amount? Any questions? If someone wants to ask something from this table, if someone wants to understand something. Shall I continue now? So these are the highlighted sectors which will be affected most by this tariff as they face the highest tariff rates. Now, the second sector where we could face a high job risk is the steel and aluminum sector, where the export volume is less than as compared to the textiles, as compared to the gems and jewelries. But yes, the second sector will be the second or the third sector which will be affected the most is the steel and aluminum sector because the expected percentage of impact will be about 60%, and it will facing a 320,000 jobs at risk. So we can estimate that the third sector which need to be taken care of right now is the steel and aluminum sector. It needs a support. It needs some or the other in some other ways. It need to be taken care of, and it need to be have some policy intervention through which it could be supported by the some kind of concessions, some kind of subsidies, some kind of diversifications, whatever may be the cases. And then since the recent move made by the government in the GST reform is in order to boost the domestic consumption and the domestic demand, so as the sectors which are mostly affected by this tariff impositions, many exporters have been affected by this, they can at least try to diversify their products to Indian markets so the Indian domestic demand rises. But the issue is that some sectors and some exporters could not even supply within domestically also because their products is not being so demanded in India. Secondly, there is a problem of elasticity also. I will talk that case in different perspective, but the problem is it is very difficult to transform your demand from foreign country to your domestic country because some products are only been demanded in the form of in some other countries, not in our country. So there is no such kind of demand which has been there. But in short, if we try to modify, if we like changing the GST tax rates, changing the tax slabs, and taking some reforms, it might help few of the sectors to regain whatever they have been losing on, or at least they can compensate what they are being losing there in the form of exports or export earnings. So far as, if you go ahead, the third sector which will be the fourth sector which will be affected most is the leather goods. Though less than what other sectors could have been facing, tariff rates is high, but we are not having so high amount of exports in form of leather goods. But yes, the leather goods sector will also be affected high, or in a high degree, because the expected percentage is 65%. So 65% of leather goods industry, there will be a 65% fall in the exports for the leather good industries towards US, and it will again lead to a job loss of 1,90,000. So if we can see the job risks, it is quite high. And specifically, if we see, is the case of textiles and gems and jewelry. So these two sectors, and at least these three sectors, including steel and aluminum, will be facing a huge issue for coming at least a year. This need to be taken care of, and there we require some policy intervention. Now we go by the country-wise analysis in particular sector, and this we can do through the Power BI. So here we are having the expected impact percentage by country and by sector. So which are the prime sector which will be most affected for each country, if we talk about, and from this we will get to know how each and every country's exports will be affected through the US tariff policy. So if we can see the case of Mexico. Now for Mexico, if we go, we can see the highest effect will be in the case of the pharmaceuticals and the chemicals. So these two sectors will face the highest impact of export over US. So one is chemicals and number two is the pharmaceuticals. So these are two prime sectors for Mexico which will be most affected due to the tariff imposition. Then we take the case of Vietnam. So in Vietnam, the most affected sector will be again the chemicals. Now in the case of Philippines, we could find it to be gems and jewelry. Once again, it's one gems and jewelry. In case of India, as I've already mentioned, the highest impact will be on the textiles as well as gems and jewelry. So that gems and jewelry sector is similar in the case of Philippines and similar in the case of India. So for both India and Philippines, the gems and jewelry sector will be most affected. And secondly, the textile sector. So textile sector and the gems and jewelry sector will be affected in case of India and in case of Philippines. In case of Brazil, which is also facing the same tariff rate of 50%, because India and Brazil right now are the countries which are facing the highest tariff in the world from United States of America, we can see that Brazil faces for about 76% on automotive sector. So this automotive sector is the prime sector which will be affected by the US tariff. The rest all sectors doesn't face so much of the, but if we talk about the case of electronics, it would also be the second number. But in case of Brazil, the highest impact will be on the automotive sectors. It takes the case of China. Now in case of China, you can see through the bars, the highest impact will be on again the automotive and the leather goods. So these two products will be there where they will be having, or the two sectors where they will be having a highest impact on the exports. So one is leather goods and another one is the automotive sector, like same what is in the case of Japan. I think you can connect with me and visualize what we're trying to discuss right now, because in different colors we are having different sectors. So this light blue color shows the agricultural sector. This dark blue color shows the automotive sectors. Orange shows the chemicals. Then this violet shows the electronics. Pink is been visualized by gems and jewelries. Then purple is given by leather goods. Then This light yellow color is being by machinery. Then this maroon color is shown by the pharmaceuticals. Then this dark green is shown by the steel and aluminum. And at last, the green color is showing the textile sector. So in case of Vietnam, the agriculture products will be facing the highest amount of impact if we compare through all the countries, because Vietnam exports a lot of agriculture products towards US. So sector wise analysis, if we can see, so the so in case of each and every nation, if we compare each and every nation on sector basis, so in case of agriculture sector shown in the last corner, the light blue color, so we can see the highest impact will be in the case of Vietnam and Mexico. In case of India, it will be a 40%. So for about 40% impact on the agricultural products, but highest impact will be for Vietnam in case of agricultural goods. Second is the case of steel and aluminum. In case of steel and aluminum, we can see the highest impact in the case of in the sorry. Second is the case of automotive sector. I'm sorry for that. So second is the case of the automotive sector. So in case of automotive sector, you can just see for Mexico, the impact will be 29%, for Vietnam 74, for Philippines 22, for India 25, Brazil 76, China 72, Japan 74, and UK 71, and Canada 74. So more or less, we can see the highest impact for the tariff will be in the case of Brazil, China, Japan, UK, and Canada. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries, specifically Brazil, China, and Japan, they will be facing the highest impact in the case of the automobile sector. Next, we take the case of chemicals. In chemical sector, most probably the two countries, Mexico and Vietnam, they will be facing the highest impact on their exports due to this imposition of tariff. Rest all more or less are not so significant. Next is the case of electronics. In the case of electronics, Brazil will be facing the highest impact as compared to the other nations. In case of gems and jewelries, we can see the highest impact will be in the case of Philippines and India. Not other countries will be facing so much impact on them. In case of leather goods, China will be the highest, and number two will be the India. So China faces the highest impact on leather goods. In case of machinery, Vietnam faces the highest impact. In case of pharmaceuticals, India faces no such kind of effect. Now, this need to be taken care. India has no impact on its pharmaceutical sector because pharmaceutical sector doesn't faces any type of tariff on its imports. So I hope it is clear to everyone. And the highest impact will be in the case of Mexico. If we take the case of steel and aluminum, in case of steel and aluminum, the highest impact will be in the case of Germany and China. And at last, the textile. In textile sectors, the only two countries which will be facing the highest impact would be India and Philippines. So this is how we have done the analysis sector wise for each and every country. So which country will be facing the highest impact on a particular sector, this we have done now. If anyone wants to ask anything, want to have some another question on this or a particular thing, or if you want to get to know more insight about the same, please let me know, or else I move forward. There's a question in the chat box. Number one, sir, will the impact on these sectors cause a fall in demand? Yes, of course, they are causing, since the tariff has been imposed on these sectors, therefore it has been expected their demand is affected because these goods are demanded in US. Now, how this demand will be affected, that depends upon the elasticity of demand. So probably you can see if we have tried to analyze the impact. So as far as impact is concerned, it is primarily depend upon the how much exports we are doing. But yes, it again depends on secondly on the elasticity of demand. So if the goods demand is inelastic, so therefore there will be not so much impact on their on these sectors. But and there will be no such fall in demand. But if the goods demand is elastic, then we will see that there will be a huge fall in demand, and absolutely these sectors' demand will be affected because what we are exporting, that price will rise in the US markets. So if that price rises, how much elasticity is there? So that's why US also played a very tactical game. In pharmaceutical sector, US didn't impose any tariff because US knows that the demand for the pharmaceutical products from India is almost inelastic, and that won't make any difference for US. So that's why US government tried to make the highest tariff on the products which where it found it that it is competitive, and secondly where the elasticity of demand is high, so that there will be less dependence on the imports. I think the one who asked the question, Rai sir or ma'am, uh, you got the answer for this. Next, Shelja ji asked the question that if tariffs were being withdrawn, then no such effects. Absolutely, if tariff been withdrawn, but that will at least cause some disturbances and fluctuations for the coming period, because it will have some effect, though it is will be transient, but it will have some effect. So these are the two things which will be expecting. Though we are not expecting so much long for this period to stay, but at least there are some fluctuations. There will be some fluctuations. So I hope you got the point. Now, these are the thing where we talk about the sector-wise analysis. Now we go back, and at last we will try to understand the effect overall on each and every country because of this tariff imposition and tariff policy. That is, we will try to understand how each and every economy will be affected through this tariff imposition. Now, this we need to understand how this tariff imposition will be affecting the major economies of world. This need to be understood very carefully. Please try to follow me now. So first of all, we'll see the impact on GDP. So as we can see, highest impact will be on the GDP of China. China's GDP is expected to get reduced or get curtailed by minus 1.20%. So if we talk about the case of China, China will be facing the huge impact because Chinese economy is most affected by the trade, because Chinese economy is more dependent on the trade from the nations, and hence its economy will be affected by the trade. And since trade is get affected more because of tariffs, so therefore the economic GDP will also be get affected by that. So if we talk the case of China, China will be having the highest impact, and you can see it is about for minus 1.2%. Next is the case of US. So US will be the number two, where the economy will be affected by 0.8%. That is, there will be a fall of expected fall of 0.8% in GDP. Next is the case of Latin America, where it is again expected for about 0.6%. Next is the case of India. So India could expect a fall for about 0.4% in the GDP because of this tariff policy, as exports are being affected. Then the Asian countries, that is Association of Southeast Asian Nations, that includes Philippines and Vietnam and all other countries. They're expected to have about minus 0.3, and at last the European Union. So the primarily we could face that India and China will be and US. These three countries might be facing a highest impact on their GDPs because of this tariff imposition. Next, we move ahead to the case of inflation. What will be the situation of inflation in each and every country, which we have talked about. So far as inflation is concerned, so the absolutely the most effect will be on the US. As we can see, there will be 2.3% impact on the inflation. That is the sum of inflation impact. If we go by the sector wise, so this is the table for that. So we can see that inflation will be 2.3% affected. There will be 2.3% rise in the inflation in case of the United States of America. Next is the case of Latin America. There will be 1.6% rise in the inflation. Next is the case of ASEAN, then India, then European Union, and at last China. So you can interestingly see Chinese economy will be most affected in case of GDP, but will be least affected in the case of inflation. Why such thing is there? The thing, the reason for this is, if we talk about the case of inflation, now usually what happens, inflation is a result of or a product of many factors affecting all together. Sometimes it is demand pull, sometimes it is supply side, sometimes it is structural, many things are there. Sometimes it is imposed through monetary pressures. So if we talk about the case of China, though China has been following a policy of devaluation and purposive devaluation of its own currencies in order to promote its exports, but Chinese economy in case of currency will be least affected. Why? Because China used to diversify its exports through weakening of its own currency, but its currency get weakens, it leads to some exchange rate depreciation. But the thing is, it get compensated by the amount of exports earning it makes. So you can understand this like this: the amount of or the impact of weakening is compensated more by the amount of earnings it makes in form of the currencies from other nations, and that leads that China will be having the least impact on its rate of inflation. So Chinese economy will face the least effect on the inflation, but yes, and also the Chinese economy is also going through some recession also. So you can expect that the Chinese economy will not be facing such an impact. But all other countries, and specifically US, will be absolutely facing a highest rate of inflation as of now. Now we come to the last part, not the last part, second last part, the employment effect. So which country will be having the highest employment effect? Now, this is again surprising. As you can see, China will be the country will be facing the highest effect on its employment level. It is expected that employment level will be reduced by minus 2.1. So the highest impact will be on the employment level because Chinese industries are facing a big issues when these tariffs will be imposed. The second is the case for US because absolutely many of the industries which are using cheap imports as an input for their manufacturing sector. Now these manufacturing sector will see a supply shift because of high cost on the inputs from the other nations, because US imports a lot of raw materials and a lot of semi-finished goods, a lot of capital inputs from developing nations at a low cost, and that makes their product also competitive. But now what happens, it will face a higher cost of material, and high cost of material will lead to cost push inflation, that is called the supply shift, and supply will reduce, and hence US will be the second country where there will be a high rate of inflation with less employment. And yes, it has been shown. So the second country which will be affected by this imposition is United States of America, the reason as I have mentioned to you. Next is the case of India. Third case is for India. It's about 0.8% fall in the employment. Next is the case of Latin America, and at last it is Asian and European Union. So the most effect will be on India, US, and China in case of employment. And yes, we can connect it with GDP also. Okay, as GDP reduces, as GDP falls back, as GDP stagnates, there is absolutely a fall in the employment levels. Now we come to the last part of this analysis, that is the overall impact. So if we see the overall impact considering GDP, employment, inflation, and other factors also, so on an average, highest impact will be in the case of China, absolutely. Number two will be United States of America. Number three will be Latin America. and at number 4 it will be India. So primarily it will be a game for US, China, and India. Now, how India could be able to retaliate, how India could be able to resist this type of effects, and how to respond to these challenges, that's again a part of a strategy. Because of this tariff shock, because it is expected that GDP will be impacted, job loss will be there, and currency will also get weakened. So there are some response strategy. Number one comes from the part of government, how government responds to this. So probably number one, it will be having a diplomatic engagement without retaliation. That is, try to fix some trade agreements with the United States of America so as to resist on, so as to uh, prevent such effect on the job loss or from the employment sector in these particular sectors which I have talked about. Next, we can talk about export diversification. We can diversify our exports to some other nations so that our exports remain keep on flowing, and we can diversify and sell it to some other markets where our countries are having good relations. Second is the case of sectoral exemptions, as we have seen the pharmaceutical sector has been 0% tariff maintained. So in some other sectors, we could try to fix, or some sectoral exemptions could be provided such that in case of other sectors which are most affected and which are more sensitive for the Indian economy, we can try to understand and we can bargain on that. Third is the case of the competitive disadvantage. Now, this is the biggest challenge. Since we are facing the higher rates than China and Vietnam also, though China being the biggest rival for US, but right now what we are facing is a big issue, because what rate we are being charged, that is 50%, which is more than what being charged on China also. It is an alarming situation. And now we have also lost that China plus one advantage. What is China plus one? Because earlier, what China couldn't be able to manufacture, sell in the US markets, the alternative will be India. Now, India couldn't be the alternative because India is still facing more tariff than China. So it will be a biggest threat to the trade between India and US, and this is a biggest disadvantage for India. Otherwise, what we used to have the China plus one strategy where India becomes the alternative for sourcing the imports for US markets if when China is being charged with higher tariff. But now India is having the higher tariff than China, and it is almost of no use, or it is insufficient now and irrelevant also. Next is the part of the industrial adaptation. So supply chain diversification to third countries, that is I've already mentioned. Some domestic market pivot studies. And now this is the domestic reforms as the GST reform is concerned, which through which the government has tried to increase the domestic demand by reducing the indirect taxes in the form of GST. And in such a manner, we could at least absorb some of our exports in domestic demand, which are not being sold in the US markets. Now, talking about the broader impacts. So, if we talk the tariff structure, so highest impact on India and Brazil, China number 2, Vietnam number 3, and most other are facing for about 10 to 15%. The overall world will be facing an export growth slowdown, specifically the emerging markets. So the highest impact will be on the emerging market nations or the emerging nations. If we talk about the case of country-wise analysis, as we have discussed, so the most affected economies are the emerging economies. So US has targetedly affecting the emerging economies through the tariff rate structure which it has followed. And if we talk about the case of competition, which has now been diverted, Chinese goods, now it will be a competition because now we have to actually compete with Chinese goods because we are having facing more tariff than China. And yes, there will be currency depreciation and capital flight risk. Now, what is currency depreciation and capital flight? If some countries become less competitive, it's a higher tariff on our nation. So our sector will be facing a slowdown. And yes, it will lead to the outflow of FDIs and FIIs from Indian economy. And that will again lead to a fall in or the currency value or the exchange rate. Sorry, the value of rupee, because that will weaken the rupee, because outflow of dollar will be there, outflow of many capital will be there, and this will lead to a slowdown in the economy, and might our stock market will face a kind of a slow cycle. So these are the overall impacts which we talk about. It makes some sectors vulnerable also, specifically the labor intensive manufacturing sector will be most affected, and hence there will be a problem of employment and employment issues. There will be a global chain disruption, supply chain disruption, because there will be an immediate impact on the cost as of this tariff imposition. For almost 10 to 15% logistic costs will increase for about almost more than 50% companies, and this need to be taken care of. How this need to be this can be prevented, and how it could be resisted. So this is all for today, and I won't go farther now because we have to give some more time for discussion also. So I just stop my explanation here, and we are almost done with the effects of the US tariff policy on all over world, and specifically in the case of India, with sector wise analysis of each and every factor. From tomorrow, I'll continue from here only, and then we will move to the next topic, that is the Iran and Israel Middle East tensions, the geopolitical hotspots, sanctions, and a strategic checkpoint. So tomorrow we will be discussing this, and after completing some aspect of the US tariff evolution, because it would take a lot of time. It took 2 days to explain the US tariff evolution, because it is more relevant and it is right now having a highest impact on all over the world. So tomorrow I'll be finishing with this and moving ahead to the next topic, that is Iran and Israel Middle East crisis. So thank you for today, and now I open the house for the questions. I will welcome any sort of discussion, any sort of questions which you want to ask. Please, the house is open for question.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a query here now. Because of this impact, the tariff, and the government has been doing a lot of policy regarding to absorb the surplus in the domestic market. Do you think if the domestic market is not able to absorb it, will it lead to a case of a dumping issue, the national market, to dispose of the surplus?
Could you repeat the question, ma'am, please?
So, as you have said that there is a lot of strategic policy the government is trying to
Mm-hmm.
make so that
Mm-hmm.
we can serve the domestic demand
Okay.
sorry, the uh, surplus demand from the export market in the domestic economy.
Yes. Yes.
Now, if that one, if you're not able to absorb it,
Mm-hmm.
will this lead to a case of a dumping where these countries can sell it off a very higher price to the other countries when it is not absorbed in the domestic market?
Okay, I got it. I got your point. So probably dumping is concerned. In case of dumping, what countries do, they try to sell in the foreign markets by reducing the price